Welcome back to the War Chest. I'm David Riddell and this is the Glossary of Power, and this section we're dealing with the O's and the P's. First word, O for obfuscation. Obfuscation. This is the ink-squirting obstructive responses of culpable people in office who fear exposure, accountability and scrutiny of their actions because they have been involved in illegality, collusion, cover-ups and conspiratorial activity, and never more so than in post-COVID outbreak days. As agents of the perpetration of greed, suffering, war and failed policy, the single narrative they pursue is left vulnerable to total collapse wherever the spotlight of public cross-examination is turned on them. And like the cockroaches they are, they run for the cover of darkness because their deeds are evil. Tucker Carlson, I owe him for that quote. Observe this phenomena on Dr. John Campbell's reports. When experts came to give reliable but damning testimony against the safe and effective mRNA vaccine at parliamentary and Senate inquiries in Britain, America and Australia, in the wake of so much heartbreaking evidence that a disaster had been propagated in the name of health science, all the cockroaches simply stayed away. Some of the chambers were practically empty in the rush to avoid becoming aware and hence accountable for what had so recently transpired. Expert testimony given to empty parliamentary chambers. Heartbreaking. O is for offence. Interesting word, this one, isn't it? Where does the centre of gravity lie with regard to its meaning? Is it actually given, this injury, or was it just taken by virtue of abiding in self-imposed denial and some deliberate misconstrual? Those delicate of ear, the snowflakes, those Karen responses and hidden agendas that are always trying to control what people are exposed to and what the pre-indoctrinated are allowed to hear. All reality is highly offensive to somebody who is trying to live as if it didn't or couldn't exist alongside of my truth. And my apologies if your name is Karen. Such a tragedy to have your noble name hijacked for such an ignoble use. I guess now you are going to have to decide whether or not to adopt a hurt feelings stance yourself, aren't you? I wonder which way you'll jump and whether the law would support your litigation or laugh at you. We can never quite predict how these laws will be applied in the present climate, can we? And O is for overreach of governmental authority. For example, hate speech legislation to achieve coercion via controlling public statements and conversation. This results in mind and thought control that will eventually result in the loss of all justice, freedom and democracy because absolute power corrupts absolutely. This degeneration of liberty now for the first time enabled by digital health monitoring to control movement, digital finance to control expenditure, digital photo identity to enable total tracking, monitoring social media to control social communication, and even prevent pre-criminal activity. See also the Virality Project if you think we are getting ahead of ourselves with these kinds of concerns. You need to inform yourself on the Virality Project. And O also stands for the Overton Window. In brief, it refers to how slowly and how little expert opinion can be communicated from the laboratory or think tanks to the general public domain, and how long it takes to trickle down to the layman's conscious awareness in law, medicine, theology and politics. For example, from the time Helicobacter pylori was discovered to be the true cause of stomach ulcers and not the stress and anxiety that had been so commonly believed, it was approximately 10 years before physicians regularly prescribed for this as the pathology involved, and his colleagues ceased to pillory the Australian physician who discovered it. 10 years. Paradoxical law of the sexual proposition. P is for paradoxical law. of the sexual proposition. Harassment charges can now be held against men for unwanted sexual propositioning. Did you know that? But here's the problem. How does a man know beforehand whether his proposition will be welcomed by the woman or not, unless and until he actually propositions her? Does she deem him to be flirting or harassing? Is she being chased or is she being stalked? And is that a fact or merely a mercurial perception, dependent on the mood of the moment? Her mood. Does the law depend on the mood of the victim? P is for politicians, the weather vanes of political life, swinging any way they can to capture the breeze of the next election, thus ensuring their own ongoing survival. And in order to hold on to the influence they become accustomed, even addicted to, perpetration of their continuation in public office becomes their highest priority, however idealistically they began their run. And as such, they find themselves adopting the same philosophy as the cancer cell, survival purely for the sake of survival, with very little use to the unpopular causes, very little use to the very body they operate within, especially those causes that are deemed unpopular, no matter how just or needed that cause may actually be. But the practicality of winning elections costs money, lots of money, which means they must serve the causes of the biggest donors if they themselves to survive, regardless of their personal scruples. Hence a perpetual reciprocity which may or may not serve the people they represent at all. Without a strong ethical and moral base to begin with, my observations tell me the ambitious politician quickly resorts to keeping up with the crowd that keeps them in office, and doing the right thing doesn't quite describe their fights now. The salt has once again given up its savour and is no longer fit for purpose. And P is for the privatisation of truth. Characterises this present Western liberal paradigm. Academics who are so deficit in epistemological discipline that they can't even distinguish the difference between absolute and relative truth. Absolute truth, what Francis Schaeffer referred to as true truth, objective, scientifically verifiable facts, is now downgraded to and at the service of emotional subjectivity, personal construction, cultural norms and tribal protocols. And no man doubts whatever is right in his own eyes. Justice now becomes the whimsical servant of fashionable politics and mob-rule judgments. P is for Peritrope, turning the tables on the all truth as relative truth. There is no absolute truth, self-defeating claimant. If you believe that all truth is relative, as the Greek philosopher Protagoras did, then those who oppose you must also be correct. It's called the Ishmael effect. It can never be absolutely true that all claims to truth are purely relative. It is therefore actually immoral to believe in amorality. P is for postmodernism. This includes the Marxist insistence that human beings are malleable to whoever holds the utopian reins. It always eventually becomes a religious battle, fought also over women's bodies as the ones who bear the babies of tomorrow's generation. And P is for personal pronouns, which must conform to chromosomes if we are to retain our grip on reality. If we don't, we enter a world of make-believe for the sake of indulging and validating another's delusions. Facts don't care about your feelings, and science knows only two genders. Thank you, Ben Shapiro, for reminding us of that. If you were called to a medical emergency and your male penis-bearing patient was complaining that they were having a miscarriage, would you treat him as if he was, for fear of hurting his feelings? If you are already referring to him as her, where is the end of this very slippery slope you are sitting on? P is for primum non nocere. It's the medical oath that first and foremost, I will do no harm. Currently violated in every medical centre and hospital that practices abortion, sex change surgery, allopathic medicine, and inoculates with the dangerous mRNA cell-sabotaging jabs, to name but a few. Beware iatrogenic therapies of all kinds. Medical intervention is still one of the leading causes of premature death in the world today, and possibly far more prevalent in the extensively pharmacologically immersed health systems than anywhere else. Go back to I for iatrogenic medicine. You need to get a hold of that concept. P is for pre-crime logic. Pre-crime logic? It aims to predict would-be criminals and predict future crime. Borrowed from science fiction, The Minority Report, the attempt to predict crime and arrest or monitor the suspects are a present-day reality. But is it diligent policing? A dire warning of real and approaching danger? Or is it controlled by intimidation and fear-mongering, by a police force drunk on power and control and terrified of what might happen on my watch? How should we distinguish when faced with these preemptive strikes against yet to be committed crime? It condemns, arrests and removes rights of movement and free speech from those under suspicion or even surveillance, even before they have committed any offence at all. Therefore can be considered guilty only of crimes of thought. Won't happen here? Did you know that during the COVID pandemic, 161 people were arrested in Britain on grounds of public nuisance, disturbing the peace or insurrection, for merely making public statements that went against the prevailing political and public health narrative? 161, many statements of which have now been shown to be prophetically correct, although no recompense or public admission of injustice here, like, we overreacted terribly and we're very sorry. Nothing like that has yet been forthcoming. P is for public permission by stealth. Every crime is committed in a social context, never in a void or moral vacuum, and these social acceptance factors must be factored in when considering the state of our social and community innocence. For example, psychopathic predator Harvey Weinstein was permitted to indulge his criminal activity by the sick Hollywood cultural value of fame at any price. Bernie Madoff was known to be dealing dishonestly by auditors as he strove to make many of his peers fabulously rich long before a junior clerk blew the whistle on him and collapsed his cruel denial. Have another look at Psychogenic Epidemic. Now the World Health Organization are currently working towards absolute international totalitarian control on the back of deliberately generated pandemic hysteria via the proposed pandemic treaty, currently under consideration by the UN. Draconian measures aimed at taking away national sovereignty and instituting public health by dictate, May of 2023. By arousing human paranoia, wealth and power-hungry men and women in public and private office allow rolling psychogenic epidemics to continue to serve their own diabolical strategies. Conspiracy? You better believe it. All the evidence is there to see if also you are not in denial. P is for psychogenic epidemic, also called mass hysteria and mass psychogenic illness, or MPI. This social phenomena consists of collective anxiety due to a perceived threat and can culminate in a cascade of symptoms suggestive of organic disease without a readily identifiable cause. The most dangerous kind of epidemic humanity can ever face, stated Carl Jung. Read again the allegory of the Emperor's New Clothes by the Danish genius Hans Christian Andersen for a good illustration of how psychogenic epidemic works. The aim of propaganda is to have a new idea or solution seized upon by the masses in the complete absence of critical regard. For example, the new experimental medicine or vaccine is touted as the wonder drug and seized upon by frightened people without sufficient critical analysis. or the new improved law or philosophy, model or word is hailed as a breakthrough, and crowd-led people fight to be the first to climb on board until the pendulum swings and they regret their haste to buy into it. You've been listening to Riddell's War Chest, the Glossary of Power, and we have just completed the section under P. If you like what I've said so far, let me remind you that you can download the entire transcript for free. Click here and you'll be able to read it for yourself.